Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Beyond the Urban webinar. These are unusual circumstances for all of us. We intended to have this as a live event from down by St. Catherine's Square here in Brussels, but instead we are live from the office of IETM, the International Network of Contemporary Performing Arts. We in IETM are hosting this webinar jointly with the European Network of Culture Centres, Culture Action Europe, and Trans Europe. I am Ása Ríkharðsdóttir, I'm the Secretary General of IETM, and I will be your moderator today. With me are Elena Polvitseva, Head of Research and Policy at IETM, and Sara Tura, Coordinator of the European Network of Culture Centres, and they will be, in a minute, presenting to you the essence of a joint policy paper these four networks have written together about how we Europeans can support art in rural areas. But first, we will hear from somebody who is indeed working in a rural area on culture and art. And I welcome Fernando Garcia Doro, who will speak to us via video from Spain.
Hello. Well, thank you for inviting me to contribute to the conference, now turned into a webinar. That I think is a great opportunity to continue the conversation we started after Kreuzlingen. There is a global trend, as you know, now in which the rural is progressively abandoned and agriculture is as well less and less practiced. It's the first time in history that more people live in cities than in rural areas, and I think that this is sharing common aspects in different parts of the world, but very much in Europe. We have it's a common question. The fact that Europe has 40% of its territory, of its land that is cultivated just by 3.5% of the people. So it's a very small number of people who are now growing and living from the land. But we have to consider that in many countries there is still 80% of the land that is rural. In the countries like Finland, Portugal, or Austria. In England, we want to look at the countryside as a space of opportunity. The rural, the peri-urban, the non-urban spaces are spaces in which we can and we should experiment and test forms of life that would involve a new rurality. So there is a growing need to rethink on forms of the growth, re-scaling and relocalization. All these factors involve rethinking the rural and the ways we live in the city. If you want, even the city form of life has to somehow, as we say, the term we use is repeasantfication, no? To adopt aspects of the peasant form of life into our daily habits. Peasant form of life involves forms of mutual support, forms of reuse and recycling many of the main materials in our daily life, rethinking as well rhythms, rethinking attention, forms of satisfaction, the notion of good life that was associated with having a basic things and enjoying with others and with a more nurturing surrounding has to be central for the transition of our societies to more sustainable models. So the growth and relocalization involves also forms of food autonomy, and this is very important. The restoration of these life support systems that we need to look at involve as well cultivation, and cultivation would be a concept that is connected with care and is connected as well with a paradigm a new humanist paradigm that we could say is also post-human. No? Somehow, it's no longer putting human species at the center of creation and granting us the right to spread and dominate, but actually to consider ourselves more part of a cycle, and together with many other living forms in which we rely upon. In this cultural resetting, we could say, we need also to elaborate and articulate what the rural has been treasuring and what is left of the rural entails into contemporary forms. Therefore, we need to somehow transmit all that living experience, very often silent or silenced by a dominant cultural form inherited from Enlightenment that was privileging the city and the urban space, now the art circuits connected with the market, art market, and a form of high art that has at certain point somehow disconnected from the everyday of the average citizen. So we should ask ourselves, what kind of art are we talking about when we are talking about art in rural areas, or specifically contemporary art in rural areas? Culture that could happen or should happen in rural areas wouldn't be necessarily the extension of traditional art manifestations in the rural. The rural shouldn't be, or the art in the rural shouldn't be either a theme, a topic, a new, let's say, genre for art as usual to be inspired by or to look at. In all these approaches that mainstream art is doing to the rural, we very often lack the voice of the rural itself. So even if it's important to go beyond the white cube and do things in the places, it's not just to bring, again, the artist, author with a genius idea that has to be followed by everyone. What we need to look at is to forms of giving voice and making cultural processes that involve co-creation, that involve a new agency, offering a new agency to the rural communities themselves. And in that sense, yes, not instrumentalize the rural in the sake of, again, the very often self-referential discourses of the cultural field. I think we need to reinvent the advantages of those cultural forms in current terms. For example, the countryside was always valuing aspects like hosting and welcoming the foreigner. We need to work on that with contemporary forms and be able to ask the right questions. I think we need to, therefore, then, just to end, think on challenging those top-down approaches and bring the cultural initiatives with a participatory approach to make these projects to be meaningful and useful in the local context, but also to keep a currency at the global art discourse level. And for me, it's also very important that the agrarian sector, the agrarian sector, the primary sector, the very few people that are still growing food, working with animals, and especially in what is called traditional farming systems, so high nature values, they are at the center of the conversation because they embody somehow a vision, understanding that could be of great use to reignite these local narratives and rural narratives and other forms of life. The artists are going hand to hand with the villagers and developing projects that are not just representational, but also what we call scale one-to-one. Also have some form of poetics as well as practical meaning. Well, I will leave it here, and I hope this, kind of a little bit long explanation of the ideas and the steps we are taking within Inland contribute to the conversation we will have in this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fernando. I'd like to echo the voice of the rural itself is indeed missing. And on that note, we sitting here and the 4 networks do not claim to be experts on the subject, but we represent jointly over 5,000 organizations and individuals, which many are living and working in rural settings and non-urban contexts and creating culture and arts projects. Our policy recommendations are based on numerous small and large gatherings and meetings and working sessions being held over the years in our 4 networks and by groups within our networks. And this is important, we consider the ideas presented here today as a starting point, as the beginning of an ongoing dialogue, which we hope to continue with you and those who believe in the role and value of arts in rural areas. As another contribution, I want to tell you about that IETM has just now this minute launched a new publication on the value of art in rural areas, which you can find free for download on our website under publications www.ietm.org. And with that said, I want to give the word to Sarah, who is going to give us the context and the rationale of our joint policy paper.
Thank you, Elsa, and good morning, everyone. So we are here because we feel the urgency to acknowledge at all policy levels that we are operating in a situation of climate emergency and growing populism. And this does require a change in all sectors. And why are we focusing on non-urban areas? Well, firstly, non-urban areas find themselves at the front line of very rapid transformation. Demographic changes, migration, political turbulences, and not last, the climate effect of the actual intensive ways of production. At the same time, as Fernando rightly pointed out and explained, they are a space of opportunity due to smaller scale, more time or space, and to the fact that there are less hierarchical governance structures. So non-urban areas host a large number of sustainable projects of responsible use of natural and cultural resources. And then what's the connection with culture? So contemporary art and culture have a unique potential to trigger a creative process of rethinking economic paradigm and models, and to reconnect people with nature, while at the same time foster new imagination for system change. And this is nowadays very important, especially now that other challenges are somehow making us reconsidering the way we will operate in the future. So contemporary artists and cultural professionals, together with multidisciplinary team, can help really realizing the potential of rurality of being a laboratory of experimentation for conceiving innovative vision of how global society, no matter if they're rural or urban, central or peripheral, can actually function on different levels, economical, political, and social, of course, for a more sustainable future. We find it unfair that often the policy discourse is focusing on other aspects when speaking about non-urban areas, especially tourism or material heritage, while culture is often disregarded or over-instrumentalized and at best considered as a solution for just local challenges. We think it's time to change, and this is why we started this process, and we are here now with you reflecting on this topic.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And now over to you, Elena, who's going to give us the recommendations of our policy.
Thank you. So what should be done at the policy level to support culture and the arts in the rural areas? We call policymakers to create and augment investment in culture and the arts in non-urban contexts. This should be done through including culture and the arts in all funding schemes which tackle non-urban and peripheral areas, as well as through integrating rurality and non-urban context in all cultural programs and schemes. And this should be done with respecting the following 4 principles, which you normally also should see on your screens. Firstly, we should expand focus from built heritage to intangible heritage in living, forward-thinking contemporary arts and cultural practices. Second, we should take into account the peculiarities of artistic and cultural work produced in rural areas, meaning that more space, time, and efforts needed in order to undertake research, engage with communities, and realize long-lasting impacts. Third, we should necessarily respect the autonomy of local communities, their values, concerns, and aspirations. And fourth, we should necessarily stimulate participation, inclusion, and equality as guiding values of cultural and artistic work. We have identified 5 spheres in which we think policymakers should take an action. First one is mobility. As a matter of fact, many national and European mobility programs and schemes for artistic and cultural professionals do not take into account specificity of rural work. So we think that those instruments should consider the peculiarities and the needs of artists and cultural professionals working in rural areas. Third sphere concerns networks and networking. So it's necessary to encourage and support collaborations and partnerships between cultural and artistic professionals working in non-urban contexts, as well as policymakers, which should exchange knowledge on how what should be the best way of embedding culture in rural development programs. Third field concerns capacity building. It would be great if there would be small but easily manageable grants directed to artists and not to intermediary organizations. Plus, there are training schemes needed for cultural professionals and artists working from urban areas which would like to work in non-urban contexts, so that they understand better the specificity of local reality and local communities. And third, there should be training given to policymakers which want to start integrating culture in their policies tackling rural environments. The fourth sphere concerns transversal work. In the publication which we have just launched, you can find many practices which show that artists in rural areas engage quite an efficient and active way with other disciplines and with other sectors in order to tackle transversal challenges such as social and demographic issues, economic development, environmental change. So this transversal work should be recognized, supported, and promoted. The fifth area, which is probably a bit more general, but definitely not less urgent, is framing the current debate. We think that it's urgent to pose right questions about art and culture in rural areas, and to find good answers to those questions, which would be based on qualitative research. We think that we should find new approaches to this topic, and first of all, start reimagining culture and heritage through the lens of contemporary arts and living culture. So we invite all of you collectively to think concretely how we can translate those proposals into next steps and concrete measures. And one of those steps we thought could be that the European Parliament conducts a comprehensive study about the value and situation of contemporary arts and culture in non-urban areas.
Thank you, Elena. Are we live again? Yes, we are. Thank you very much, Elena. I am very happy to tell you that we have a very good crowd with us today. We have 159 people that have joined the webinar so far. And in this unusual time that we're all in, I think that's quite an achievement for our first little experiment doing a webinar live from the IETM office. We now want to hear from you, and in case you have not downloaded the whole policy paper document, it is on all our website of all 4 organizations, so it's very easy to go and get it. But you have now an opportunity to speak, and there are 2 ways of doing it. You can write a question or a comment in the question box that you all should be seeing, or you can use the raise the hand button, which is on the top right of your screen. That way, our webinar technicians will see that you want to speak, And when I mention your name, it is your turn. They put you on our list, and we take it by order of those that raise their hand using the hand raising button. But we already have a first speaker, and that is Bhatia Hoffman, Policy Officer of DT Education and Culture. Please go ahead.
Hello, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Perfect. Good morning to everyone. I'm very happy to be able to talk to you and also experiment with this new way of connecting and working together in these difficult times. Thank you very much for going ahead with this meeting. I was also very happy to see that despite the difficult circumstances, you decided to go ahead. I think this is also very important, and this is also a strong, let's say, message that, again, despite the difficult circumstances, we can continue to work together, collaborate together, and go ahead with this important work. What I wanted to give you is a few elements from the, let's say, policy, EU culture policy context side to tell you a bit maybe where we are, where we stand now, and how we can, let's say, put things forward when it comes to the to this EU level. So I've noted a few points while listening to you I would like to touch upon and kind of maybe extend. When we think about framing the debate on the EU level, we have, I would say, quite a good context at hand that we can use to our advantage when trying to address the topic of culture in non-urban areas. Of course, 2018 was a big momentum for culture heritage, as you all know. All across Europe, with quite a few new policy documents, such as New European Agenda for Culture, European Framework for Action on Cultural Heritage, as well as the Work Plan for Culture 2019-2022 from EU culture ministries. And all of these documents, in some way, I think, allow us to connect to the topics that you were mentioning. Speaking very specifically, for instance, about the Work Plan for Culture, there is quite a big strand of work that the member states are interested in, namely the role of culture for cohesion and well-being. And among this, an open metaphor coordination EU member states expert group that is due to launch this year on the topic of how culture can contribute to territorial and social cohesion. And it was also a very specific request from member states. We're negotiating the mandate of this upcoming EU member states expert group in the council last year. And as you know, this kind of groups, this so-called open method of coordination groups, work in a way that allows all member states to delegate their experts. But member states really expressed the wish for this group to work as much as possible on the topic of non-urban areas. So we hope that this is something that is going to let's say be touched upon by this group as much as possible. Then, of course, the Voices of Culture process that you know well, which is led by the Commission and currently facilitated by Goethe Institute. One very specific group in which all of you are associated. I'm also very happy for this, because I hope that your current work and this recommendations and paper can nicely feed into the work of this Voices of Culture group on culture in non-urban areas. We've had a meeting scheduled end of April, 28th of April, with this group. We will have to see how this is going to also be organized, whether this will also be a remote online meeting, on whether we will manage to have a physical meeting. Anyway, I know that after your meeting in February, all the members of this group are in touch and are working together to prepare this brainstorming report. So again, I hope that all of your already unveiled and shown contributions will be feeding into this work of this group. Speaking very specifically about cultural heritage, 2018 was again the year of European cultural heritage, but the idea behind it was to look not only at tangible cultural heritage, but also its intangible aspects, and also very much the local dimension of cultural heritage, different ways in which our own stories related to culture and cultural heritage can be accentuated. And I think this also links very much to this local aspect, and very much also non-urban aspect, and again, underlining the importance of intangible cultural heritage. Speaking very specifically on cultural heritage, I would also like to flag and invite you to have a look at our new action that started recently, called Cultural Heritage in Action. This is a peer learning scheme for local and regional authorities in relation to local cultural heritage practices. And there is an open call now until end of March, until the 27th of March, for local and regional authorities or local stakeholders to submit their practices that they will later be featured in a special catalog that will be created. From September onwards, hopefully we'll also be holding peer learning visits to selected cities and regions. What's important with this project, and this is also very clear, let's say, expectation towards this project led by Eurocities in cooperation with CAE European Affairs, ERIN, which stands for European Regions Research and Innovation Network, Europa Nostra, and the Architects Council of Europe. The expectation is to make sure that we have a balance between urban and non-urban areas featured in the catalog, and then taking part in this upcoming peer learning visit. So again, like, this is also something where I would like to encourage all of you to go on the website of the project, cultureheritageinAction.eu, see for yourself, and again, spread this information as much as possible with local non-urban stakeholders and local non-urban actors. Then, of course, I mean, looking at your recommendations and endpoints, of course, quite a few of them concern the topic of funding and opportunities that exist for local areas. I would also add to you, I cannot tell you too many details about it at this stage, but a few weeks ago, DGAC has adopted the annual work plan for the implementation of pilot projects and preparatory actions, which are normally every year voted by the European Parliament. And there is going to be quite a specific action on the role of culture for well-being, and with quite a specific focus on non-urban areas. This is an action that is going to also look a bit at what's happening on the local level, possibly allow for some local policy experimentation. Stay tuned, because this annual work program will normally be published on the Commission website, so you will have a look at this project. And again, following this, we will be launching a special call later this year. So this, I think, is going to be very important, possibly also for your organizations, as this might be something which very much could possibly allow you to extend the work you're currently carrying. Then, of course, again, the question of budgets. To let's say address some of the ambitions we have, we need ambitious budgets, and of course, as you all know very well, we're not in a very easy context in the future negotiations. The question of mobility, this is something that is very, I think, valid in these discussions, and we really hope that the future Creative Europe will, at least to some degree, allow to address this individual mobility needs of culture and creative sectors across Europe, and that this is something that could be of benefit for culture in urban areas. Then, of course, I think it's important to keep in the discussions, and our colleagues from the Commission in charge of rural development, in charge of regional development, so namely the colleagues from DG Agri, DG Regio, so the services are in charge of these topics in the Commission. We hope to have them also involved in the discussions we'll have in April with the Voices of Culture group. But in the meantime, it's of course very interesting to also look at these different new upcoming programs and see if there is a specific possible hook for the topic of culture in non-urban areas. And again, I also count very much on your organizations to help here with convincing the unconvinced, so to say, about this important topic, because of course, you don't have to convince very specifically DG Education and Culture about the importance of the issues you're addressing, but it is not always necessarily the case with colleagues working in other policy areas. So this is something I'm also very happy to see on your side, and I also cross my fingers for the follow-up to these recommendations. And again, like I'm very happy to also be in touch with you on the side of DGAC and try to connect the dots and find ways to best work together as much as possible.
Thank you, Bhatia, for this very comprehensive overview of what has been going on a European level. It is great to hear about this new funding opportunity. And I think you're right in saying that although these are unusual times, this is a good time to have a webinar like we are doing now, to have a policy recommendation coming out. And I'm really glad to hear about your positive remarks about our draft paper. And as we have said today, this is an ongoing dialogue, and we will definitely keep on contributing towards it. So thank you so much for sharing with us, and feel free to come in again. We have a question from Irana Balan, who says, when talking about areas for action and transversal work, you mentioned the publication you just launched in which you talk about example. Which is the publication? This is the publication that IETM has just published, and you find it on www.ietm.org under publications. We call it simply Art in Rural Areas, where we have 3 authors who have written articles about different aspects of the subject. One of them being Fernando, who we just heard from Spain on video, and 2 others. And then we have a lot of examples which we collected through a survey which we conducted last summer, where we got up to 200 different examples of projects that are going on right now in Europe and beyond about innovative, sustainable projects and solutions and centers and what have you, by artists and culture professionals in rural areas. And we weave this through in these publications, and I really invite you all to have a look at it. Then we have a question from Filipa Francesco. My name is Filipa Francesco, choreographer working in rural areas in Portugal, specifically with traditional dance groups, connecting traditional dance and music with contemporary music and dance. My difficulty is to engage political decision in understanding the importance of this project, and that they need time, and to be very open to the context and expectations of different groups. So how can I be in touch with other projects and support? Well, ideas, girls. How can we help, Filipa? Well, one way is to join one of our networks. That's one way, because we are joining a network like ours. You get contact with lots of people that are working in similar structures as yourself.
I agree.
Yes, definitely. As a ENCC, we have a working group composed both by ENCC members and non-members, and everyone is welcome. We are sharing best practices and always open to dialogue and new ideas.
Absolutely, and in IETM, we also have a specific group called the Area Group that has been working for many years on arts and contemporary arts in rural areas. And it's very easy to get in touch with those group members. You can just send us an email at ietm@ietm.org, and we will send you all the contacts to get in touch. Then we have a third question from Sylvia Carta. Hello, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation and for organizing this webinar despite the difficult circumstances. My question regarding the nature and the definition of peripheries, mountains, areas, countryside, islands. How do we make sure to seize the distinctive features of all these different realities and that they are reflected in policymaking without falling into one fits them all approach? Wow, that's a very good question and a very valid question. Can I give the word to one of you?
Thanks. That's indeed a very good question. And in our policy paper, we did formulate a very general definition of what we mean by non-urban contacts. You can read it in one of the footnotes there. But, and indeed, our paper is quite general. You can notice it because we tried to be comprehensive and inclusive of all those different specificities that may occur in mountain areas, countryside, islands, and so on. So the attempt was really to take into account what unites all those places, what is common for them. And also, this paper is, as you can understand, tackles the European Union level. And as we know that one of the programs, one of the policies which tackle non-urban areas is cohesive and regional funds of the European Union. And as we also all know, those are being designed at the EU level, but the money are being distributed on a national, regional, and local level. So we kind of have a very good hope that all the local authorities know the specificities of their realities. And we also state, I think in our publication, that this policy paper is meant to help you guys and all other members and all people who work in local context to actually translate those requirements in a more local recommendations. So this tool is very general, this policy paper. It's not by accident. We could have been more specific if we would be just talking about European Union policies. And as Alza said, we're still probably planning to go into more specific areas and to produce more specific papers for the EU programs. But for the local and regional programs, we can't do that, being European, pan-European networks. And we do hope that there will be attempts of doing so on a lower level.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, we really hope that you will be able to use this draft to put it into your local context, and then we will be continuing the conversation, and we will be hosting more meetings on the subject. So if you want to follow our work and our actions and our activities, make sure to subscribe to the newsletters of all the 4 networks, because we are all working on the subject in different ways. Now we have Martin Rurtov who wants to speak. Please introduce yourself, Martin.
No.
Do you hear me, Martin?
Yeah, I didn't request to speak, though.
Ah,
sorry.
it's okay. What about Piotr? Are you there, Piotr?
Sorry.
Hear me?
I think
Hello,
you
can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Hi to you all. Hello,
Hi.
Sarah. Hello, Elena. Hello, Asa. Nice.
Hello.
Finally joining you. I had some work tasks I didn't follow from the beginning, but I'm completely pleased to be having this special day of launching so many files at the one time, because we have been working on several issues together, and I think you mentioned this. I would like to underline that we, as European Network of Cultural Centers, we have been working on the manifesto, crowdsourced manifesto for smart, shared, and innovative territories 2020. This was a title, and we started in 2016, so 4 years ago, and we have been gathering recommendations from several stakeholders all around in Europe, and finally we came with 22 countries represented and more than 200 stakeholders. And just today as well, also we have uploaded this file, which is full of recommendations on the EU level and on the local level. What kind of actions are needed, because we do not want to speak only on the general policy approach. We would like to influence the local authorities, local governments, in order to take actions in the peri-urban, non-urban, rural areas, because there are a lot of decisions still influencing a local situation, not dependent directly on the European context. So it's very good to be having this wide approach. So you can find on the ENCC website, encc.eu. Today there is this manifesto already uploaded, and it was as well our input to the common policy paper. I'm super pleased that Culture Action Europe, IETM, and finally Trans-Europe Halls as well decided to be joining forces in order to be having our word spread in the more impactful way, because we were all working on this very important issues on rural development, the territorial development, but from sometimes different points of views. And the third element is the publication of IETM. I'm as well very pleased, and I'm happy to be invited as one of the 3 authors. I scrolled it already online just a few minutes ago, and the final version looks very interesting. And also it gives us this unique opportunity to step beyond Europe with our discussions. Sometimes this European box is being very inspiring, but sometimes we still need to refresh, and still we need to go and check if those difficulties that we are facing are maybe only very little according to the difficulties experienced daily by remote areas all around the globe. So this publication and the concept to be gathering so many, like around 150 testimonies, cases from all the continents, it was very, very ambitious, and I think that the final result is just great. And Maciej Hoffman, I mean, thank you very much. I was joining as well the Voice of Culture in Alfeld, and we heard some updates then, and now it's great to be having this connection, and we are working exactly on the reports dedicated to the topics announced by Voices of Culture. It will be ready in April. So the good element, all our networks, I mean, Trans-Europe Halls, IETM, Culture Action Europe, ENCC, and other European networks are also involved in Voice of Culture. So there is a very good cohesion and a very good already joining forces aspect on so many levels that we believe that this discussion organized as such will bring only the best results. So I think it's all from my side for now, and it's just great to be having like the sense of this family. Now we are so much devoted to internet because of the incredible times we are living in, but still we continue and we can share and exchange. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Piotr, and I think I echo on behalf of all 4 networks that we share your sentiment wholeheartedly. This has been a really rewarding, interesting, diverse collaboration that we have engaged in. And as I said earlier, the time is right. There is so much happening on a European level, but also beyond Europe, which is why I'm happy you mentioned the publication. It has been mentioned again, and that you definitely are one of the authors of the articles within it, because we are trying to have an international outlook on the subject in IETM, and we have a number of strong examples being shown and discussed in the publication, which are outside of Europe. So this is definitely an international subject to be addressed. And on that note, I'd like to bring in a comment from Sabrina Belencier, and she says, "Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this webinar, especially in this difficult time. I have a practical question. Are there any studies concerning methodologies? I speak as an artist and a culture operator working in an urban context, but now coming from a mountain area which displays a very closed mentality towards contemporary art and culture, and in general towards things coming from the outside. So, in thinking about starting a project in this context, I am very much concerned on how to avoid impositions, but also on how to concretely approach and involve people. Yet a very good question. There are definitely methodologies, but the thing that I want to point out to you first is to go indeed and look at the many examples that are being discussed and studied in the IETM publication. And in the list in the back, you find the website of very many organizations. You also can find videos that are linked, where the people speaking, working in those fields are some of them exactly talking about their methodology. And the Inland project that Fernando mentioned in the video earlier is definitely a very interesting methodology of doing exactly what you want to avoid, of really working from the bottom up, and where the people in the area are very much in the driver's seat, so to speak. So do take a look at the publication and then be in touch for further information. I would really like more people to ask questions and speak, but before that, Ilana,
yeah, I would like to add to
something.
what Ausa said, responding Sabrina. So I think beyond the publication that we have just issued and where you can find indeed some examples of good methodologies of working with local communities, I think that maybe that's could be one of our recommendations as well, so that there is not only this policy approach towards investing more in rural areas, but also, as we already said, that there is a capacity building needed for people coming from urban areas to go to work in non-urban contexts. Maybe that is a good feedback, and we can integrate it further and recommend to develop those toolkits to help people to understand different local realities. And on another note, this discussion have been, I know that the ENCC has been talking about it a lot, and we have been as well discussing it for a few years now. And we have been organizing specific conferences only about that, from which we issued reports, which actually contain some of the recommendations on how to practically approach this work. This is something that we can maybe also put as links in our final message, which we will send to all participants. And some of those working groups were organized on the basis of rural group, as we call it, within IETM. And I was wondering if some people from that rural group, which is around 50 people, are also here with us now. We would like to hear from them, because I think what we also need now is to hear some voices of people who actually do work in rural areas, what they think about what we presented and what also Maciej said about what is European Commission doing. Or maybe you have some other remarks.
Absolutely. Please use the raise the hand button, which you should have available. And as soon as we see you have pressed the raise the hand button, you will be able to speak. Or if you prefer to write in the question box, you can also use that methodology. Right now, we have no one that has asked for the word, but we have 150 people still online. So there's a lot of people listening. And now we will hear from Terry Bhatia, who is the Secretary General of Culture Action Europe, speaking from Barcelona, Spain. Terry.
Yeah, hello, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Perfect. So thank you, Asa, Sarah, and Elena, for doing this presentation on behalf of all the 4 networks. So thank you very much. It's working pretty well, and I'm very glad to see that many people participating in this meeting. So I'm glad to be here, and after the way that we started all together after this conference in Konstanz Kreuzlingen in Culture Crops, so last year. So I wanted just to answer just concretely the question from Sabrina, because she was talking about the methodologies to work within these communities that are really sometimes difficult in the sense of being so protective of their way of doing things. I don't know, so the video that we saw from Fernando, it's a short version of a bit longer video, only 20 minutes, that maybe we could post afterwards, because he is exactly explaining this sort of methodologies, how we need to draft maybe the curricula of the artist to train artists and other cultural agents to drive focus group, to be able to create participative projects. Because one of the things that I think it's the most important topic here is to put this proposal to put people at the center in a one-to-one perspective. This one-to-one perspective in the rural, in this art and culture in the rural areas, it's crucial. So what we cannot do is just focus on the artistic perspective or the cultural perspective, but to look at what is happening, what is the reality in the rural areas. And that means that it's not a solution. Back to another question, it's not a solution, a one solution for all. But yes, so if we consider these local actors, these local realities, this one-to-one perspective, this poetics together with politics and together with practices, and essentially these peer-to-peer relations. So nobody is more important than the other one, and it should be a collaborative processes and participatory processes. So I think in this sense, projects like IETM has in the publication, projects that are behind the manifesto of ENCC, projects that are just happening all around Europe in these rural areas, are showing us that this is one of the best perspectives to work. And I want just to as well throw another question that raises in a very contemporary and way. Yes, I'm in Barcelona. I cannot move from my house. So yeah, sometimes in the European cultural policies, we think, or we have been hearing through years and years, that we need the European added value of the project has to do with mobility, with moving people from one place to another, and so maybe now could be as well the time to rethink what we mean really by mobility, seeing what is happening right now in these days, that frontiers are just being closed slowly. So I think we have a great opportunity to rescale, to rethink the paradigms we are working in. And I will just invite all of us to think about these things, like rescale, relocalize, degrowth, rethink mobilities, rethink collaborations, and so on. That's it. So
Thank you for that, Tere. First of all, I just want to agree with you that it is the specificity that is important, and the one peer-to-peer dialogue and solution is often the most productive and valuable. And networks like ours, they can be vehicles to do things, but we are not the ones that are going to be doing the actual change. It is the people working on their specific situation, on their local level, that are actually going to be the actual change makers. And indeed, let's use this opportunity of this very, very strange time we are living to rethink, reframe, and reshape the conversation. We have a unique opportunity to do so now. We have two questions that have been put in the chat box. The first one is from Julia Jorgensen, asking Maciej Hoffman, who mentioned the special call coming later. And she's asking whether you can elaborate further and explain and repeat what exactly is this call that is going to come. Are you there, Maciej?
Yes, I am there. Thank you very much for the question. As I said, this is still quite, let's say, under wraps, because the decision, financing decision, and the adopting decision of digital education and culture was only essentially adopted a few weeks ago. What I can tell you for now, because this is one of these actions coming very directly from the request of European Parliament. Again, this idea behind pilot projects and preparatory actions of the European Parliament is also to test certain solutions on the ground, address certain topics that are not often, let's say, directly tackled by the programs, and try to also, propose something innovative. But I mean, again, what I can tell you now, there are, let's say, I would say four kind of core elements of this action that the parliaments want to have. So first of all, to look at, to map what's happening on the ground, with which sources, which programs, possibly also which European programs. The question of links between culture and well-being of local populations can be addressed. And then, of course, the idea is also to look very specifically on non-urban areas, on peripheral areas, on peri-urban areas, on rural areas. Then to have something a bit of this is also possibly going into the way of let's say, small-scale research, to try and also propose certain specific recommendations. Again, since this is going to be a call open possibly for consortia, and it will be allow, I would say, to also be, let's say, do some more research on the ground on specific issues. Also to try and do some kind of local experimentation, possibly also with this peer learning methodology. So again, as you know, many of these pilot projects and preparatory actions, whenever they get published as calls for proposals from the European Commission, they are quite open in scope. So they only, let's say, specify certain elements, and then this is up for applying consortia of partners to propose something. So yeah, again, it would be the idea of mapping, researching, proposing some kind of peer learning, possibly between also local actors and local authorities. And the fourth element, I don't remember exactly now, but again, this is going to be published in coming days, and you will have a bit of a general idea where this is going. And once again, probably second half of this year, when we publish the call for proposals on the European Commission websites, you will have the full clarity on what this is going to look like. I don't want to talk too much about it at this stage, but I will just want to make sure that you keep this in mind. You follow closely Creative Europe, Facebook and Twitter, and whenever the call is published, you can have a look, react, and possibly apply.
Thank you very much. We very much appreciate that you share with us what you're able to share. We have a question from Else Christiansen Retsopovic. Sorry if I don't pronounce the names quite correctly, but Elsa is one of the main coordinators of the Voices of Culture EU project that is now going on regarding art and culture. And Elsa asks, to what degree are the culture networks cooperating with the EU Leader Programme, an initiative that has been more than 25 years has a more than 25 years experience in sustainable rural development, including culture. And then she puts a link to the program. And Ilana would like to answer this.
I can answer on behalf of IETM, because this question is directed to cultural networks. I can imagine that ENCC and Culture Action Europe and Transeurope would have different answer on that. But personally, I'm aware of that program, but I don't think that IETM has ever had a possibility to apply for that one. Although your remark is very right, and indeed that's a program to look into if you want to fund a project in rural areas. But maybe on that note, I would just say, because from our own experience, we are funded by Creative Europe, and that's already quite some work to apply and to be funded by that, and that's a great opportunity to work within this framework. It's not quite easy for cultural organizations to be aware, first of all, about different funding instruments, and second, it's not quite easy to apply to all of them and manage different programs at the same time. Maybe for us it's quite manageable, but I would like just to say what I heard a lot from our members, that the information about synergies between different programs is often missing. And if people are working on a Creative Europe project and they're already quite busy and applying in one field, and then they want to apply for Horizon 2020 or Leader program or whatever else, it's a very, very big effort. And I'm afraid for smaller actors, especially somewhere in the remote areas, which probably lack simply possibility to get connected with regional desks or like Creative Europe desk, I don't know what Leader has or points. So this is quite not easy. And we have been talking about this lack of synergies already a lot. And I know that since a year, perhaps, there is a website which accumulates all funding instruments for culture at the EU level. We were trying to disseminate that information as widely as possible, but there is still a feeling that there is still lack of synergies between those programs. I still find it's very difficult to I still think it's quite difficult for different cultural actors to be able to juggle between all those different things. And then now I see on our screen Else commenting back to me, saying that what mentioned in the Leader program in this context, I do not just think in terms of funding, but on the best practices and methodologies. Very good remark. I think maybe indeed, I have said already on the funding part, maybe indeed it's good for us just to look into how the program is structured and just to learn from it in terms of good practices.
Sarah, do you have a comment?
Yes, this is something for sure to be developed. I had already occasion to speak with Else about it in Germany, and it's didn't happen yet, but for sure something in the pipeline.
Anything from the other networks? Mike, are you there? Do you want to contribute? If not, Tara, are you still there? Would you like to comment on this?
Mika.
Oh, Mika is coming to join us. Mika, do you hear us? Mika is the managing director of Trans-Europe Health, one of the 4 networks behind this webinar and this whole Arts in Rural Area trajectory.
I think we have a little message from Mika on the screen that she cannot speak for some reason.
Okay,
can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Please,
good morning,
go ahead.
everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning from Sweden. I'm in a rural area outside of Lund, and what we don't have as a network, we don't have a direct experience with the LEADER program, but some members of ours are and have been working with the LEADER program. So there is some information out, but I also agree that we need to do more efforts to push maybe those potential funding schemes and calls towards the members that we can direct directly or inform directly. So,
thank you, Mika, and all the best to Sweden. And Tere, Secretary General of Culture in Europe, would also like to comment.
No, well, it's very brief comment, just to agree what Elena was saying. So as Culture Action Europe, we've never worked with, before with LEADER, and so we don't have the direct experience. But it is true that sometimes for smaller organizations, so it means small in terms of personal resources, it is very difficult to follow what we always recommend, which is to mainstream culture in the diverse policy areas and programs. So so I think there's some work to be done still in facilitating the access, the administrative burden of all the projects to be to allow the people to participate in diverse funding schemes. So, but it's mostly to say that yes, I completely agree with Elena.
Thank you. This is a note to all of us to be clear and simple in our messaging. But we have a new speaker that wants to come and join us, Julie Ward. Can you hear us, Julie?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Welcome. Okay. Where are you speaking from?
Oh, well, I'm speaking from my tiny little village in the northeast of England. I was a member of the European Parliament until Brexit
That's
happened.
what I thought. I thought it was the one and only Julie Ward. Welcome.
And it was lovely earlier to hear the questions from Sylvia Costa and to hear Terry and to feel connected with all of you. I just want to say thank you for making this possible, because I was planning to come to Brussels to participate in person because it's impossible for people like Sylvia and me to ever abandon the cultural community that we were part of. So I wanted to talk about a useful role for cultural actors and organizations, which could be to explore the complexity of rurality and challenge the stereotypes. And I say that because often when we talk about rural, people imagine past a kind of romantic pastoral images, fields and lakes and corn growing, sheep and animals. But I live in a post-industrial rural area, in a village that was a coal mining area, and it's full of deprivation, and it has a completely different kind of image, a completely different landscape from the landscape that people often think about when they think about rural. And so areas like my area suffer this awful stereotype and kind of stigma, and not really able to harness the tourism industry in the way, for example, that the Lake District can harness it. And I think that we could, as a cultural community, as cultural organizations, could do a really interesting job to explore this more complex rurality, which I certainly it is my life when I'm living in the UK to be here in this place, which is totally forgotten about. I also wanted to say something about people from rural areas, because we don't have services in our rural communities, and that means we have to go to the cities frequently, all the time, to access services. And we don't just go to the nearest cities, we become travelers, we are mobile. And I think that people in rural areas are often much more cosmopolitan than people in the cities. And people in the cities are not coming to the rural areas. So we have this kind of double perspective of experiencing both the rural and the urban, and all often going beyond the nearest cities. So there's amazing stories, for example, of people from these coal mining communities going all the way to California in the gold rush, you know, miners, people who had to travel for work from villages in Cornwall to villages in Derbyshire. I know there are people, Italians in Belgium, for example, who came as miners. You know, they would have come from villages, from one village to another. And I think we could do a really interesting job to explore all those complexities, which I think are often not present in the picture that is presented about what rural life means. So that's my kind of contribution. And I just wanted to add about LEADER, because LEADER was discussed before. LEADER remains a fantastic program. This area where I am living had LEADER programs, and many arts organizations and really interesting cultural projects, particularly cultural heritage projects, were accessing LEADER funds. And I would urge lots of people working in rural areas to consider that, think about it, and get involved. It's a really excellent program, and it helps to raise up the visibility of culture where it might not be so obvious. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia. And I think we all echo what you say, the importance of drawing attention to the specific stories and backgrounds and context. And we cannot, one shoe does not fit all, that is for certain. We have a number of questions that are coming to us, and I'm going to do my best to voice them for you. The first one is from Henk Keizer, an IETM member, former board member of IETM, and the leader of the area focus group on art in rural areas. And Henk says, we spoke about LEADER, the program being discussed, during the area meeting in Rijeka. Some members in the LEADER groups, like Mike Pattison, some culture organization and artists, were told that LEADER was not for the arts. Some applied and had money for one project. We concluded that it would be good to get connected with local action groups in our areas, and for this we need support from Brussels. So this is a comment on the LEADER program. And then Vasilka Siskova, the publication officer of IETM, based in Sofia, Bulgaria, just adds here that LEADER and other funding opportunities are covered in our publication. And very right, thank you, Vasilka, for pointing this out. There is a lot of information in this brand new IETM publication, which I urge you to take a look at. Then we have Olga Perez Vitoria, advisor on culture and education of the Greens. I imagine that that's the Greens on a European level. Thank you very much for the presentation and carrying out with the event despite the situation. The feeling is sometimes that policymaker institutions and everyone else need to understand that non-urban areas need hard, sustainable in time investment also in the area of culture. Can you provide us with examples of the opposite, of long-term initiatives to promote social cohesion and that have culture as the driver. Thank you. I'd like to give the word to my fellow ladies here on the sofa, whether you would like to come up with examples on this. I have one coming to my mind myself, but
my only response to that would be that, again, we have a lot of them in our publication, but maybe that's already becomes a bit boring that we constantly refer to the same paper where you could read a lot of nice things. And I think if Auza has one in mind, is great. And I also would like really to hear again all those people who actually do those projects. And I know that Henk, for example, has 5 examples in his mind about that, because we heard a lot of them on our IETM meetings, which are really actually fantastic stories, how farmers become artists and how artists become farmers and all those things. So maybe it's indeed time for little stories right now, at least in a very brief way we can share them.
Yeah, I totally agree with this. We have a number of members of our working group there. I can see some names, so it would be great to hear some of.
Just raise their hands. It's nice that you ask questions in the chat box, but it would be great to hear voices as well.
I agree. I would prefer to hear your voices instead of reading out your questions. Although I am trying my best, but it would be great to hear your voices. So please go ahead and speak up. But while you think about the story you want to tell us, I'll tell you my little example, which comes from my country, which is Iceland. And that is the town of Seyðisfjörður, which 30 years ago decided to become a town of visual arts. And it's a long story, which I will cut very short. In the span of these 30 years, visual arts has become the main culture pillar of the town, but also one of the 4 main economic pillars of the town. So one example, very briefly from Iceland, but please speak up. But while you think, and I really would like to say, here's some raising hands, we have a question from Inge Agnete Tapgard. Hello, my name is Inge Agnete Tapgard. I work as an artist in a rural area on the west coast of Denmark. As is often pointed out, one of the challenges for artists and producers working in art in rural areas is the scattered networks and weak connectionness. I find that there is a lot of knowledge in published documents and websites, but I miss a physical art institution that works as a knowledge bank for rural art. Do you know of any? I imagine that a lot of information can be stored, not lost, if there was a physical art space having this as a core role. What a brilliant idea, I just say. Do you know of anything like this?
It sounds a very indeed inspiring idea. I mean, there is a European network for rural development, which is not at all what you mean, but they do some research on culture in rural areas as one of their like 25 different things. So, but indeed, the physical art institution, do you mean it's perhaps on a EU level or not? But I don't think such thing exists so far. But we have Mike?
Yeah, we have somebody down to here. Mike Randers from Trans-Europe. You're on.
I didn't put anything there.
Oh, we had your hand up.
No.
Do you have an example?
Oh, that was all.
Do you have an example to share with us about a place that has made culture and art the driver? Put culture the driver's seat.
Yes, in Sweden, I have 2 current examples of members. One is in Bromölla, where the old IFÖ ceramic industrial building closed. Bromölla is a very small town on the east coast of the South Sweden, and they try to become the driver there. It's a town of 5,000 inhabitants with not much going on. Another example is the new mill town in Fengersfors, which is about 2 hours out of Gothenburg. And artists took over an old mill factory building, and they are regenerating also there through creativity. They made a bakery, they have a smith, they have a smithy, a wood shop, etc. But they're also struggling to get funding for their continuous operations. But in that region, I was there a couple of weeks ago, and in Västra Götaland, there are more and more of those initiatives popping up. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Do we have somebody else that would like to speak? You're being awfully silent. Please, this is our way to connect now. Do speak up. Tere, you want to say something?
Yeah. Yes. Yes, I wanted to just to share this project of Inland, because in Inland it's not only a project in Spain, it is a network. It's a huge network of artists and activists in the rural, and they have more than 2,000 members registered. So they are sharing experiences. So in terms of having a physical infrastructure, so if we are talking about soft infrastructure, so meaning communication and networks that doesn't need a physical space, but are just gathering all this knowledge and these changes and so on, I think Inland is a good project. Then you have other good projects, I think, that are just mixing or putting together art and, for example, sustainable food, which is the project that has been projects that are being supported by the Daniel and Nina Carazo Foundation. It's a French-Spanish foundation that are just precisely supporting sustainable food and sustainable art and citizenship. So there are some opportunities of funding, and yeah, you will see in the website. Yeah, couple of examples. So, but there are a lot of diverse projects that are just working strictly in the countryside, and they are publishing a lot of documents and experiences. So that's it.
Thank you, Tere.
Yeah.
Scott would like to add something to the conversation. Please go ahead, Piotr.
Hi again. I don't know if you already mentioned that, so because I was out for a couple of minutes, sorry, but as ENCC and not only as 4 networks, we have been organizing this campaign, #non-urban culture. And this was and is and it will be a great framework to showcase best practices, very good practices. We have been cooperating with the ENCC working group, which Sarah mentioned, and I'm so happy to be cooperating directly with fantastic stakeholders, practitioners, animators, cultural operators from many European countries. We are like around 40 members of the working group, and several members were already sharing with us those stories, and I think it would be just very good to accompany our policy papers, all the manifestos, with exactly showing more cases on social media, with the link, with a photo, and with this brand. And by continuing this campaign, we will be having more publicity, and I believe that this can only create a better visibility for the topic. So please do share with us, with the working group. You can always join us with the ENCC, and I believe that other networks would also like to collect those stories, really short descriptions with the links to your projects, and we'll try to put them online in order to accompany as a campaign, to accompany this big campaign of impact on the rural areas, topic arts in the rural areas and non-urban culture. That's from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Piotr. Maybe in the mail that we will send with all the links to all the documents that have been mentioned, we will send to all of you. We can share a mail that you can, or email address where you can share your projects in order for Piotr to work on this very good idea. But Terry Bhatia wants to react quickly, and then we have a new person that wants to speak.
Yes, just wanted to share another project. It's not a project; it's more a fora for discussion. This is supported and impulsed by the Spanish Ministry of Culture, and it's the fourth edition this year of the Fora of Culture and Rurality. So they are working pretty seriously on these topics, putting together cultural agents and rural agents to discuss. For example, this year, I think the focus is gonna be the rurality in front of the ecological crisis and the climate crisis, but working together with the cultural agents. So this is, I think, in terms of member states level, a very good initiative. And I don't know if there are other initiatives at member states level. So if any, please share.
Thank you, Tara. And now we have Fabrizio Gavosto on the line. Are you there, Fabrizio? Hello. Fabrizio, do you hear me?
Yeah. Does it work?
Yes.
Do you hear me?
Yes,
Okay.
we do.
Hello, thank you for organizing this. As you know, in Italy we are closed in the house before, so it's a very interesting way. And thank you very much for touching this theme and exploring this argument, because I want to bring a contribution of what has been happening in Italy. Well, you know, but it's very interesting to see how it's working with the system of the residencies that by volunteer of the Ministry of Culture and regions are situated in rural areas and peripheral areas. So we have about 26 residencies working on multidisciplinary circus, dance, theater, working all over Italy that are situated completely out of the city. You know, Armugna, you know, all these places, Corte Ospitale, etc. And what is very interesting is that rural areas are reacting. I'm one of the residency. I work in the area of Cuneo. And through this funding and also in Piemonte, we have a very interesting situation, which means Regione Piemonte funds initiatives, festivals, residencies, artistic creation outside of the city. If you are outside of the city in rural areas or peripheral areas, you have much more possibilities to be funded. So a lot of cultural activity is moving toward the rural areas. The other interesting thing is that people working on rural areas started with mechanism of audience engagement a lot before, you know, because when you work on rural areas, you have to create your audience. You don't have an audience. I mean, you have really to build it from the scratch. And so those two things together, I think they are working very well. It's not a model, but it's a very interesting experience. It's happening all over Italy. You have also Lorenzo from Rome that you know well, on the Adurto Teatro, which has his residency far out of Rome in the middle of the mountains. A lot of residencies are acting like this. And so it would be very interesting if what happens in the rural areas of Europe, especially, is like there's a way to connect it, because there is a lot of point in commons, and I think a lot of people now looking outside to see what else happens. But this, as you said before, information is very sparse, very all around. You know, there is the information, but if there was a point of documentation of what is happening in all the Europe areas and how it is happening, with what mechanism, with what principle of audience engagement, etc. It would be really fantastic for all the people operating in the outside of the cities.
Thank you for that very much, Fabricio. A lot of interesting points that you raised, but what I wanted to say and repeat myself is that one of the best and constructive ways to get engaged and get information and start sharing and exchanging is to join one of our networks. There's a reason why these 4 networks have put their heads and energy and resources together on this subject, is that we have had an ongoing dialogue in all the 4 networks for years on the subject. And there's a lot of knowledge within the network. So by joining, you become part of it. Now we are coming towards the last round of questions, because we are very soon going to be at 11:30 if we are not there. I don't have the clock on me, sorry. It's 5 minutes now. So we've come to the last round of question, and I have quite an extensive question on the screen in front of me, and I will do my best to read it. And that is from Marco Blasquez from Spain. First, he says he wants to congratulate us for our ongoing work. It's been very useful reference for many of those that work and develop work here. Currently, we are working on this investigation about public local culture management in the periphery areas of Madrid region. In our experience so far, we find it very difficult to address common issues and implement aggregated solutions because of the overwhelming structural and economic disparities between public organizations. The closer you get to the urban areas, the more accentuated these disparities are between non-rural areas of the same region. On the other hand, we find some generalities. One is that public workers are highly overwhelmed by bureaucracy and restricted by laws that do not contemplate culture and arts reality. The other one has to do with management capacity, low budget, small structures, short-term planning only. I want to ask if any of you have any thoughts or ideas to tackle policy recommendations and capacity building for these public organizations. This is a very interesting fund. How can we increase the capacity of the public organizations that are dealing with our funding structures and in our realities? Is there anybody that wants to respond from the sofa?
Only in the same manner as we have put it in our policy recommendation. That's, I think we said it even twice, that there should be some kind of a networking going on also between policymakers. So it's not just enough to ask for more money or just to help cultural professionals to network, but I think there should be like a real motivation and ability for policymakers to start talking to each other as well. Because on the field, the transversal work is already happening, and maybe in a way it's easier to do so because there is less bureaucratic and legal restrictions, but it's really urgent that there is some transversal work happening also on policy level. And at the EU level, that has been said a lot, that they want to go out of their silos. I think the silo was the buzzword of last year. So I really hope that the new commission manages to get out of those silos, and this example will be followed on all levels. That's, I think, what we can wish for from the sofa.
Thank you. Very valid point. Now we have 2 last questions. First is from Eski Imas, and sorry again for my pronunciation. I'm a project manager at Culture Policy Studies Department of Istanbul Foundation for Culture and Arts. We've been organizing capacity building training for culture professionals in Anatolia for 2 years. This year, we also funded the IFCD to do capacity building works in Turkey. And I see how our projects comply with your new policy report. I want to ask something about this capacity building training. We've prepared a survey first to analyze the needs of the local culture managers to design a good training program. Do you have any recommendations in terms of research and tools that could give ideas, directions, or examples about our analysis.
Well, today we are sharing together with many other publication and material also a list of resources on ENCC website. It will be probably attached also to the email you will receive after the webinar. And I hope some example will be, you will be able to find there some example because it really contains a lot of different and inspirational material.
Thank you for that. And before the last question is brought up, I have one new speaker that wants to speak, and that is Julien from Eurocities. Are you online?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Welcome.
Good morning. I just want to react very quickly to something that was said 2 minutes ago about networking and capacity building between local policymakers. And want to go back to something that Maciek Hoffman mentioned at the beginning of the webinar on cultural heritage in action. It is the new EU peer learning program on cultural heritage for local and regional policymakers that Eurocities is implementing. And just very quickly, I want to explain again what this is about, because it really goes back to networking between local policymakers. So during this 1.5-year program, completely financed by Creative Europe, we are going to prepare a catalogue of local good practices. We have a call open at the moment until the end of the month, a call to all local policymakers, so from very, very small rural communities to large cities. We want to know what are the local good practices on cultural heritage, and in particular on participatory governance and on the adaptive reuse of heritage buildings. So please have a look at our call. It is on the website culturalheritageinaction.eu and send us your good practices, because it's really a nice way to share them at EU level. And the second action that we will implement a bit later during this year is a series of 12 peer learning visits that will be open to all local and regional policymakers and to stakeholders working on cultural heritage. So that's really something for your members as well. We will prepare a calendar of thematic peer learning visits, and there will be an open call for participation that we plan to publish in June. That's the deadline we had in mind before this big coronavirus crisis, so we may have to reschedule it, let's see. But so please expect a call for participation in June or July, and we will of course have budgets to cover for the participation, traveling and accommodation costs of local policymakers and cultural stakeholders active in the cultural heritage field to learn from each other.
Thank you so much for this, and please, if you could send us the links you mentioned, that we could include it in the mail that we will send to all participants after the webinar, so that all the resources are in one mail that have been mentioned during the webinar. But we have one final comment from Mahmoud Maktabi from Iran, who has been 2 years ago set up a residency in a non-urban area close to Tehran. And he would like to get resources and information about other examples of contemporary artwork that is practically working in areas such as his. Again, this is something that is touched upon in our publication, as well as in the resources that we have alongside with our work that we are doing. And I encourage you, Mahmoud, and all of you to really study the material that we have been producing along with this webinar. But we have now come to the end of this day. This has been an experiment. It's been a really interesting experiment, which I am personally quite happy about. I hope you are too. I feel certain that the 4 networks will continue our work. We might be hosting more webinars, we might be hosting different dialogues, but for sure we are going to continue the work. And on behalf of IETM, Culture Action Europe, ENCC, and Trans-Europal, I thank you so much for joining us today, and I bid you a good and a safe day.